Welcome to this week's edition of Ongoing Conversations between me, Pastor Steve Autrey of Denver United Methodist Church, and my good friend, Pastor Paul B. Thompson.
Let's put the B in there.
Let's make it right. Of Huntersville United Methodist Church. We're grateful that you've given us this time. And Paul, as we get started, I'd just like to again say thank you to those who've sent us emails and questions and encouragement. We do appreciate that. And also, it is very helpful if you do like this, if you do share this, and if you do go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube pages at both places. It helps tremendously in getting the word out. And so we
having these tens and tens of followers is just getting to my head. It's making my head swell.
Well, you know, we're kind of a big deal.
In our own heads.
Kind of a big deal nowhere. But we're going to be talking about a guy who is a big deal, whose name happens to be Jesus. And in Mark's Gospel, we're up to chapter 7. And so as we embark on this Wednesday's conversation, chapter 7, as we were having a little bit of a conversation beforehand, chapter 7 has a lot of stuff in it. And so there's some stuff to dig into here, and there's some things in here that are a little bit difficult to understand that are still up for debate, I would say, and interpretation. So we're going to start with chapter 7 as Jesus begins by looking at the Pharisees and scribes who've gathered around. And again, these are the folks that has been noted. They are they already set their mind against Jesus.
Yeah, so we talked about it in last Thursday's podcast, this tension. It's probably more prevalent in Matthew's gospel, but in Mark's gospel, it is still there. This tension between Jesus and the Pharisees, the religious leaders, both Pharisees and Sadducees. And the tension here, especially into chapter 7, is around this idea of following the tradition of the elders, which is an extension of the law. It's not the written law. It's an extension, much like you may have a United States law, but then there is something that we follow along with that.
Local custom.
A local custom.
And, I mean, I think we in golf, are there any local rules? So there's the rules of golf, and then on a particular golf course, there may be rules just for that. For instance, there's a golf course over near Maiden where you can hit the ball as far as you want. If it goes in the water, the local rule is you get a free drop.
How about that?
It's just a weird setup on the golf course, but that's a local rule. That's not in the rules of golf, but apply to that local golf course. And so as the Pharisees are coming down hard on Jesus in this one particular thing, they notice that his disciples don't go through the ritual cleansing of hands and before they eat, and they ask in Mark 7, and I'm in verse 5. So the Pharisees and the scribes ask him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" So let's start with what is this tradition of the elders?
Yeah, so it's not about sanitation.
No.
Right. At this point, they have no idea what that means. It's something that they do as a religious ritual. Water has always been used in kind of lots of different religious events for some type of cleansing.
Well, and knowing Jesus' critique of the Pharisees, I'm sure it was something they did to be noticed by others. It was an outward show of their piety, like to go through this elaborate ritual to say, "Hey, I am somebody of note and importance, and I'm, well, I mean, is it a way of saying I'm better than you to the regular folks?"
It is certainly a way of expressing this. I am much more of a religious person. This means something to me and maybe makes me closer to God. And yet Jesus has pretty stern response to this. Yeah. Your hearts are far from me.
Right.
You do these outward signs, but inwardly you have nothing about God within you.
Right.
And
it's about show.
It's about show.
And in the response in 7:6, he said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites." As it is written.
Which that word hypocrites, basically, I think most of us know, it comes from a Greek thing. In Greek dramas, they would often put a mask on to play one character, then put another mask on to play another character. So it's the idea of two-faced.
Right. false self.
Yeah, false self.
Is it as is written about in Isaiah, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me, as you mentioned. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. And that to teaching human precepts as doctrines is something to be careful about, making up rules that are hard for people to bear. And actually rules that keep people away from God. And doctrine, I just want to take a sidebar here. Doctrine does matter. It's important that we know what we believe. And actually, while you all are watching this podcast on Wednesday, Paul and I will be at our Board of Ordained Ministry meeting dealing with matters of doctrine. And but you have to be really careful that you don't forget that doctrine is meant to serve people, not people meant to serve doctrine. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think in so many ways we run the risk if we're we hard and fast by the rules. I don't know if you know him or like him, but I heard Mike Krzyzewski speak one time, and he said a lot of rules are just made up so we don't have to think. And I think there's so much truth in that. The rule that Jesus lived by is it the rule of love? Is it going to express compassion, grace, mercy? And if it does, then probably you should follow that rule. Yeah. If it does not, then maybe you should rethink that rule.
Well, and I think for us, do our actions, do they draw people closer to Christ, or do they push people away from Christ?
I always think back to growing up in the South, on Sabbath or Sunday, which really wasn't the Sabbath, but we considered it the Sabbath. And I just remember laughing. There's so many things you couldn't do on Sunday back then. A lot of restaurants weren't open. Certainly
didn't mow the yard.
Entertainment venues, all of that. And we really thought I think somehow that we were better, more religious because we didn't do those things. And I look back now and I think I'm not sure that made us any better. I do think that all of us ought to take one day out of 7 and rest and commune with God and give our bodies and our minds a rest. But to do so because of a law probably isn't the right thing.
Well, and I think too, sometimes people, and it used to be more prevalent, at least when I started in the ministry, at the same time you did, about how people dress to come to worship. Yeah. And some people thought, well, you can only truly come to worship if you wear a coat and tie, and women wear dresses. And if you showed up in blue jeans, you got kind of that look like you don't really belong here. Those are kind of like the tradition of the elders. And the question is, are those things bringing people closer to God or pushing people farther away from God?
And Jesus then makes the statement, it's not what goes into us that makes us unclean. It's what comes out of us. And I think that's such a strong and important statement to remember. It's the words that we speak. It's the actions that we do. It's the ways that we relate to one another.
Yeah, and he goes on and says that in chapter 7. But when he's getting there, he looks at these folks, and if you're following along in your Bible, 7:9, he said, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. So the tradition of the elders was an oral tradition, not a written tradition, that was thought to be passed down. They said it came from Moses himself. So basically gave them the ability to make up the rules they wanted and the rules they liked. And even to the point where he's like, you even reject the law of Moses in order to keep the tradition of the elders. Tradition of the elders had to do with this idea of Corban, that you can make an offering to God that was designated.
Basically, you don't have to offer it to your mother and father. Oh, I gave to this particular fund at church.
So I don't have to give you support, whereas the law of Moses is very specific about the way you take care of your mother and father. So it was a way of circumventing, for some, the Mosaic command, the law command to care for their parents. And he points out that hypocrisy to them, and they don't much care for that.
Yeah, it makes them a little angry.
Yeah, I mean, and you can see, again, that tension is building as we go along. You'll see these conflicts with the Pharisees become more and more acute, and that do eventually lead to Jesus' death.
Before we let chapter 7 get away too fast, two fascinating other pericopes in Mark's gospel.
Yeah, I think we need to take spend the full weight of time on the Syrophoenician woman tomorrow, because I don't think we can really just gloss over that one.
You like that one, huh?
I don't like it at all, but that's probably why we need to spend time on it.
All right. Well, we'll come back tomorrow and we'll talk about the Syrophoenician woman and the daughter that gets healed, and Jesus curing a deaf man. Thank you for your time today. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you.